Good evening and welcome to Science is Your World. My name is Andrew Hebda. I'll be your host for this evening. And tonight we have again with us Mr. Lawrence Taylor, who was here with us previous week, talking about, last week he talked about smallmouth bass in Grand Lake, in Shubenacadie Grand Lake. This week he's going to take us on an excursion of a little bit more of the fauna and of the habitats in the lake itself. Welcome.
Well, thank you.
So, as just a quick recap, why were you interested in the Grand Lake? Why in freshwater instead of saltwater?
Well, the number of species in the lake is, to me, astounding. To have fresh and saltwater species in one lake is something new and not that I've seen, having grown up most of my life in Ontario. Mm-hmm. So I was quite keen to get into the water and see who they were and how they get along, and how a lake like this can actually hold so many species. So I did my paddling around, and I think I've come up with a little story to figure out how it all works, how we can have so many predatory fish in one lake, but still have it all work.
And still have some prey there.
That's right.
It's not all one big kettle of fish, as it were, but
That's
rather
right.
it's a...
But they've all learned, they have their own little tricks to manage to get through.
Okay, now, you've brought some video tape with you.
Yes.
Could we perhaps take a peek at that, and can you take us through a tour?
Yes, Grand Lake's shoreline just comes alive in the spring. As the daylight hours become longer and longer, it sparks off plant growth. Mm-hmm. And here you can see some of the, these will be lilies that'll grow up. Also, there's horsetail and eelgrass. But they all come to life, and it's almost like a farmer's field where you can see last year's crop lying on the bottom, which helps add nutrients for the new growth and also other organisms.
This is April, May type of thing, or
this
maybe
is
a little
May.
bit later? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so they're just starting to push through, nice green shoots. And they then, of course, start to use the sun's energy, combine it with carbon dioxide and water, and form carbohydrates during photosynthesis, which then they can do with food, make it into plant material, and that then becomes a great food source for a number of organisms. Mm-hmm. This habitat also, as you can see here, these white perch streaking out of a large stand of eelgrass.
This is similar to Jules Verne's The Forests of Crespo Island, I think, actually.
So along with these large macrophytes, you also have the phytoplankton, the microscopic plant life in the lake, which is very important, and also it'll bloom with the heat. It'll grow well with the heat, and then of course the sunlight helps its growth. But then of course, as you can see with the algae here, it tends to build up on objects, and later in the summer it becomes so thick, and as it dies, its decay then actually is not a benefit to the life in the area. Yeah,
these algae here themselves are the filamentous algae, most likely Cladophora. They're more symptomatic of what we call cultural enrichment in the business.
So with all this plant life, both large and microscopic, it then is the food source for zooplankton and numerous other organisms.
So microscopic again.
What's that?
Yes. The zooplankton.
Yes.
For scale.
Yes, which then, of course, being so small, is just a great food size for young fry who can't get their mouths around anything very large. So here we're starting in the shallows. Last year's horsetails, we moved through a small group of fungulus who really you can find them right up to the next to the shore. It's surprising how shallow they'll go sometimes.
Right, so these fungulus are those little killifish, about
right.
8-10 centimeters in size
at
maximum.
most. Yeah. And they're also in here to protect themselves from the group that sit at the edge of the weed bed. And you can see them moving through here as a school.
Do you see any predators coming into the shallows?
I've never witnessed a predator come in, no.
Yeah, the function of a school being quite fascinating. Now, a little bit deeper water here then?
Yes, now you'll find the same fish, but also a variety of other minnows at the edge. And you can see we're breaking out over the edge now into almost, if you were to stand in this water, it'd be just about over your head. And you can see a large group of fish, minnows, Fungulus. There's sticklebacks in there. Here we just see one.
Mm-hmm. And quite a variety of species then, so it's
large.
Yes.
And you also find the larger fish in this area. And we'll see a little bit later on. We'll move on to the perch.
This is what you expect to see in Malawi and in some of the tropical lakes with the diversity of species, but it's quite surprising to find that here in a maritime context.
It is, and there's just incredible numbers moving through.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they move up. Now, of course, as you move to the edge of the weed bed, you find many of the predators,
Mm-hmm.
like the yellow perch.
Mm-hmm.
These are very gravid individuals. The larger
Mm-hmm.
ones are the females,
Mm-hmm.
and they're sort of blimp proportions. They
Yes.
haven't. I'm not sure if they take advantage of the heat, because it's interesting. They actually have to have about 110 days
Mm-hmm.
below 10 degrees Celsius.
Yep.
In order for the eggs to mature properly.
Mm-hmm.
But these have moved into the shallower water that's ranging around 15 degrees Celsius.
Mm-hmm.
And they may be taking last opportunity to feed before then they go off to spawn.
Yeah, they're good. They're the ultimate generalists in our waters here.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So you can see them moving about. There's shiners, suckers,
Mhm.
white perch,
Mm-hmm.
quite a variety of fish, and all sort of cohabitating at this point.
Mm-hmm. They're responding to you at all, or most of them are pretty well ignoring you?
They're not easy to approach. They
Mhm.
will slowly move off as you move up to them, as you can
Mhm.
see they're doing here.
So this is essentially just starting to drop off a little bit. So
Yes.
is it? Uh-huh.
Yeah, the water beginning a little bit over your head. Now, of course, in our last show we mentioned smallmouth bass as a species present in Grand Lake, and they too will be taking the opportunity of the warming water to then start building nests. The males move in.
Mm-hmm.
Now we've jumped into the night footage, and this
Yes.
little individual just squirted into the depths of the mud is an American eel. And in the May-June period, the best time to find them is actually at night. You know,
Mhm.
During the day, you won't see a single one, or
Mhm.
not. Yeah, I mean, you're not likely to find one. Whereas
Sure.
at night, you'll find them almost every 10 feet.
Yes.
They're all over the bottom.
You're trying to discourage people from swimming at night, aren't you?
Well, no. I mean, they won't bother you at all.
Yep.
No, most of them moved on.
What size would would this one be, for example?
This is probably a couple of feet. This is
Mhm.
one of the larger individuals
Mhm.
I came upon.
That tipping of the tipping over of the twig, that was just bumping into it, or was it actually foraging at that?
No, it actually ran into it,
Mhm.
and then I knocked the stick.
Uh-huh.
Very sleek animals. I enjoy being around them. They're quite easy to photograph.
It's fascinating because if they're essentially nocturnal in habit like this, and yet they still have the pale underbelly in the
Mhm.
dark on top, which would almost suggest they should be a daytime
That's right.
upper water species. Anybody else moving around that time of night? Or?
Yes, this little individual here is a freshwater mussel. You don't see this during the day. They usually stay on one spot, but this is the trail left behind the mussel as it uses its muscular foot to push itself through the mud.
Now, how big are these ones?
4 or 5 inches.
Mhm.
And you can actually find them in mats in Grand Lake, which to me is unusual. Usually you only see mats of mussels in the ocean along the seashore. Now, nighttime's a great opportunity to get in close to some of the smaller minnow groups. That was the stickleback. This is the fungulus. They all line little pockets in amongst the weeds on the bottom, usually very quiet. This is an unfortunate white perch that has a bad eye,
Mhm.
and a minnow just quietly maintaining its position in a little bit of current.
Mhm. Now that's up towards the head of the lake, is it again, or that one? Or?
The inlet, yes.
Okay. Mhm.
Then again, one of our very ripe females.
Is this fairly typical in movement, sort of jerking like that and moving the fins, or again, this is because it's nighttime?
No, from other footage, I've had them sit right on the bottom, not move at all. The older ones tend to, or the larger ones, I should say, will tend to move around a little bit more, not as comfortable. The smaller ones not being ready to reproduce yet, and so they just, like the rest of the minnow group, just sit on the bottom, unless you disturb them.
Mhm. Where do they spawn? Are they shallow water spawner, or are they deeper?
The perch?
Yes.
Yeah, about 10 feet of water or so. Yeah. And they produce a long gelatinous tube
Yes.
that will attach to objects on the bottom. Now this one always gets oohs and ahs. This is an adult sea lamprey, and it is now making its final journey from the Bay of Fundy and is off to spawn. And what's interesting, they don't feed. As they migrate and during spawning, they don't feed at all, and their gut's actually reduced to just a cord, a thin cord. Their body then starts to discolor, and their eyesight declines. As we'll see a little bit later, but this one, it almost looks like cataracts over the eyes. They're very opaque.
Now, these ones, as with trout and salmonids, they go back to their natal streams as well. Then, so.
And they're large individuals. This is probably approaching 3 feet in length.
So about the thickness of a small wrist, basically?
That's right. They're surprisingly thick. Very strong animals. I've grabbed onto 1 or 2 to take a look at them. And it's like holding a very strong snake.
Yes.
Very hard to control.
With a bunch of teeth on its tongue and other places, yes. So these are the jawless fishes. They don't have a lower jaw.
Yep. And an autocord for back support. The males, too, you can distinguish. They have a very predominant cord that runs down the back. You can just sort of see that. Now, this is an interesting shot. This is a large school of striped bass in the background.
Juveniles or?
No, these are fair-sized animals. These are the largest that I've seen in the lake. This is about June, and they've congregated together.
Yep. That form of swimming, you see, is referred to as body caudal fin periodic. So they get their whole propulsion by using the whole body rather than just bits and pieces on it. So that's a lovely photography of that. So they don't have any paired fins that are visible.
No. And they have no jaw. Of course, the sucker that they use then to grasp onto their prey, which they suck the juices, fluids out. And that period, though, of course, is spent at sea. They then move into Grand Lake, move up into a couple of the inlets, spawn, and the young, the fry of the sea lamprey actually move down into the lake, bury themselves into the bottom,
and stay there,
and filter feed for the next 7 years, which is interesting. So most of their life is spent in fresh water.
Yes, there's a lovely shot there, actually showing the gill openings on the
and that's
on
what
the
it feels
side.
like.
Yes.
I guess when they're attached to you. Now here you can see that the eye is not clear at all, and then a close up of the.
Is that fairly typical of them, or is there something most marine organisms that come in, with the exception of the salmonids, they'll tend to get a bit of opacity because of the change in salinity.
Yes. All I know is that that's a characteristic feature of them moving in, and it may be more body decomposition in a way, because of course they do die.
Yeah. So the olfaction, the smell, it becomes very important to them.
Yeah. Now we're moving through a stand of eelgrass here to a catfish nest. And it's used a rubber tire.
They're the rubber tires we were discussing last week.
Very important. He has a guard smallmouth bass here taking care of his property. As we mentioned in the last show, the smaller bass will come up and poke around to see who you are and then move on. But here we see is about a foot long male bullhead catfish.
Now, they have very reduced eyes, too, I noticed. So
yes. And they're omnivorous, so they'll eat plant and animal material, and they feed exclusively at night.
Yes.
And they use their barbels then to root through the bottom sediments and detect prey. Now, actually, there was the female was inside the tire, and I didn't know it at the time. And at one point, she bolted away. Didn't get a chance to photograph her.
You didn't play the part of an honest field biologist and remove this unsightly piece of material there by...
No, it was a nest, and I was not about to disturb it. I mean, even the literature, they include tires as part of the standard habitat for nesting.
The tires and supermarket carts, actually, I think. Now, this male is actually, he's not guarding, but he's staying with
near
the female?
This is probably still, they're still pre-spawn. They like the warmer temperatures, and they're remarkable fish. They will stand extremely warm temperatures, up to 90 degrees, before you can kill one off. They'll take They'll survive in water with very little oxygen and high levels of industrial and sort of natural pollutants. So they're very tough fish. They're here to stay.
Yeah, remarkably good sense of hearing as well. Yeah.
Now, this is to show that not all my filming is easy.
Yes.
This is moving out one of the inlets.
And how did you anchor yourself here, he says?
On a rock.
On a rock, a big rock, yes.
A rock in one hand, the camera in the other. And you can see the bubbles churning by. And here's an Atlantic salmon.
Yes. Now, this is landlocked, or it's...
It's most likely landlocked, yes.
This is near entrance, near the entrance from the lake above, then, or is one of the streams coming in?
Yeah, this is one of the other streams. Yeah. And just very comfortable sitting in the stream. We're sort of moving in and out of the boundary layer. And I found, compared to the smallmouth bass that we saw last week, who tended to bite first and ask questions later, very choosy. It would look at possible food bits first, and then decide whether or not he really wanted to take a bite at it.
They have a specific search image they're going for, in other words, It must be quite costly going out for a piece of food. Of course, then you're back into the current. It drives you back, and you have to regain your position. Did you find groups of these individuals setting up, or
no?
That's only on the par then?
Individual. Yeah.
It's unlike in streams where you get the par themselves in these mosaics.
That's right. Yes. No, this was just a singleton.
So this would be how large would this individual be?
About a foot long. Yeah. Very pretty fish. I was very pleased to meet it in the stream. I had not expected to see it. I had actually been following the lamprey up the stream.
Who was looking for the salmon? Yeah, right. As you say, but they weren't feeding, right?
That's right.
So maintaining a very, very relatively tight position with respect to the...
Yeah. That just shows some of its aquatic dexterity. They could turn on a dime. They come down and suddenly turn back up in the stream. Now, another
brookies here,
stream, yes, brook trout swimming past a group of Gaspereaux. Now, it's cruising, looking for food.
That's into current, or you're just swimming fast behind it?
Yeah, I'm swimming behind it, trying to catch up to it. The individual was not completely pleased about having me about. Was still trying to feed and sort of keep its distance from me.
I can concur with that. Having tried to follow them myself, they're indeed a challenge, because the response is to get away from things that move and make shadows. You have to come in not from the sun, but from behind the sun, and hope they're facing the other way.
And as I've mentioned, there's so many of the fish that we've seen so far are timing their spawning to have their fry meet that wealth of zooplankton. And they use the hot water, the warmer water allows the embryos to develop very quickly and meet that food supply. Whereas the trout and the salmon have sort of taken a different route. They use the very cold water when they lay their eggs in October. That very cold water does not allow the embryos to develop very quickly. Of course, they overwinter, they continue to develop, and then hatch in May. So they too meet that growth of food in the spring, but have just used a different strategy in embryo development.
Yes, that's quite a good advantage to that, though, I can see, because if they feed all summer, early fall, and spawn, then they can still get a bit of food for overwintering. However, if you feed in the summer, overwinter, and then spawn, unless you've been feeding ravenously before yourself, then you're
it's a real advantage, and you wonder why the bass and the others have chosen that strategy, because it definitely puts a lot of stress on them to convert so much energy into reproductive tissues
in a short period of time.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, which is why perhaps our maritime habits or habitats are perhaps not best suited for them, but
they do survive.
They do survive, yes, indeed, yeah. So again, this is the same individual that you've been tracking?
Yeah.
It didn't like you.
No.
Interesting to note the tail on the oh, this is somebody different here.
Yes. Now this is not a fish, of course. This, unfortunately, I didn't get much time to play with this individual. I had a scuba tank. I would have remained a little longer. He was in a bit of current, and I was just snorkeling. It's a large individual too. It's about 2 feet across the back of the shell. I
noticed you didn't put your fin anywhere nearby there.
Well, no. We'll dive down in a second and get a closer shot. Now, of course, this turtle's taking advantage of any dead animal material that comes along, or any unwary fish who might get too close to those jaws.
So between the turtles and the eels, they do quite well in cleaning up.
Yes, yes. And I was surprised, very negatively buoyant in the water. No problems walking along the bottom, whereas I was swimming very hard in the current trying to maintain my position. Now this I sort of feel should come with traffic noises.
Yes.
A large barrage of fish passing
You got some
by.
large shiners in that area, and you got quite a variety of things coming through here. Again, not what you'd expect in a freshwater lake,
That's
a
right.
Nova Scotian lake, and
Yeah. It's really quite spectacular, and this is really what's drawn me to Grand Lake.
so this is, again, you're going into a bit of a current there.
Yes. And, when I started out with this footage on this day, you can see smallmouth bass here and white perch. And I was merely feeding them a few of the freshwater mussels that you see there on the bottom.
Quite a few.
Lo and behold, I look up, and this large school of shad and gaspro and the occasional striped bass suddenly came up to me. I spent about 45 minutes on the bottom. That's my tank.
As I say, you had a tank.
That's right.
This is why you're here with us today.
Yes. And you can see the striped bass is about the center of the screen at the moment.
Now, time of day?
Later in the afternoon, an overcast day. So the shad and the gaspro are a little bit light sensitive.
Yeah.
So they were very comfortable with this lower light. And in just great numbers. And of course now their strategy, when you look at this group here, they're all carnivores.
Yes.
But you have the smallmouth bass, the white perch, and the stripers who will eat other fish and other organisms.
Yep.
Whereas the shad and the gaspro then are eating the zooplankton.
Right.
And I encourage anybody who catches one of these fish on hook, take a look into the mouth. Because it's a fantastic array of gill rakers that are used to collect those very small bits of animal life, the zooplankton.
What the gill rakers are, for those who don't know, are on the insides of the gills, you have this series of bony-like or cartilaginous-like teeth, almost in some cases like a baleen in a whale that are used for filtering. But even in carnivores, they have a use and stop the animals the food from getting out. Yeah. This is that's remarkable. But the inference, of course, is with this number of fish here is that there's obviously quite a bit of food in this area.
That's right.
But having a large number of fish where there's food, eventually you'll deplete it. So, is this something that you see as being cyclical? They come and they go into these shoals, or?
And this is what allows Grand Lake to have the number of species that it has. Many of the adults it doesn't have to feed because they're anadromous and they move off to sea to do most of their grow up. In the sea, so the lake doesn't have to support the stripers, the shad, the gaspro, and the smelt, which we haven't seen here. They simply are really coming up to spawn, and then the lake will have to nurture the young.
That actually brings an interesting point with the striped bass, which of course, when they spawn, they go down to the intertidal, and in the Shubenacadie system, where you've got the bay fish come up to the intertidal area to spawn. You've got the lake fish from Shubenacadie Grand Lake go down to the tide to spawn, and then once they finish, then everybody goes back from whence they came.
Respective corners.
Well, because they're quite distinct, quite different as individuals. The lake ones are darker. They have a bit of a parasite burden. And they're much smaller for the same age as the other ones. But that's still absolutely astounding that you'd find that kind of a diversity there.
It is. And so those who tend to be there all year long, the white perch, the yellow perch, they're common to lakes, and they manage to survive on the food that's available. But then you have the bullhead catfish, which then is opportunistic on both plant and animal life.
Whatever comes, yeah.
Yep. It's amazing. They've all used slightly different strategies so that they can maintain their numbers.
They can partition the resources there.
Yeah.
Having some deep holes in that lake, just as we're slowly coming to the end of the show now, most of the larger deep lakes, and certainly inland, in the continental inland, have populations of lake trout. We have several populations in some of our deeper lakes. Did you come across any such in
lake trout?
in lake trout in there?
I've asked around. I've heard people talk about them. Supposedly they were in the lake at one point, but it appears that they're not there any longer. Yeah. And in fact, I was also interested to know, it's a little hard to tell the Atlantic salmon that we saw a little bit earlier from brown trout, but they also don't appear to have moved up into Grand Lake. They're more, they're further down the system.
So down the system and also spawning, obviously, in the...
yeah, it's more likely where you find them.
Very, very diverse. Maybe as we roll down here, that the video is just about finished, I guess. Is water quality, you find when you were down there, water quality seems to be fairly high, or
the
spotty?
inlet from Fletcher's, there's a surprising, I don't know how many the number is, but it's 30 lakes or more that finally end up in Grand Lake. And you can see that the filamentous green algae that grows there, that's an indication that there's a lot of nutrients coming through, and the mats of mussels indicate that too. But the size of Grand Lake and the depth, that nutrient seems to disperse fairly quickly, and the lake actually has a low amount of nutrients as you move further on. So the water quality is good.
Is good, but something to keep an eye on.
Yeah,
and,
a smaller lake would not probably fare as well.
So very high energy regime, essentially, or
yeah.
Overall, yeah. But as you say, you have shallows that are relatively quiet. You have deep holes that are active.
Right. And as deep as Grand Lake is, and the size of it, it's the shoals and the inlets that are really supporting all of its life.
So where the food is coming in, a lot of food is being washed down.
That's right. You're sort of your environmental sandwich of air is your top piece of bread, and the lake bottom is your bottom piece of bread. The water in between, that meat fill is so big that it can't support a lot of life due to its depth. Light won't penetrate through. So it's the shallows that are really very important.
Well, we'd like to thank you very much for coming and sharing your lovely footage. And perhaps when you go out and do another field season worth of work, you might come back and
I'd be glad to.
come back one more time. Thank you very much, Lawrence.
Okay.
Appreciate having you.
Thank you.